Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. This is Matthew, and in this short episode I'll be playing a clip from an episode of an Unbelievable podcast from April 2021. It features two guests, one a Christian and the other a former Christian. The commonality is that they both have an interest in illusions. This episode is called, Is Christianity a Trick of the Mind? The clip I'm about to play is from about 35 minutes into the episode, where the non-Christian guest talks about being able to consider the other side's point of view. What I want to address is not what the guest says, but what the host, Justin Brierley, says immediately afterwards. There is a disparity between the two, and it illustrates why how Christians think about their critics is often the reasons why discourse between them is difficult.
I think the biggest thing has to come down to being willing to entertain the other side, right? And This goes for both sides. As an atheist, as a Christian, if I'm an atheist and I'm like, I don't care what evidence you say to me, Christianity can't be true, it isn't true, God is real, and I continue to focus on that, don't even entertain the possibility, that's intellectually dishonest. Same thing as a Christian or in any religion, right? If you say, oh, well, I can hear your arguments, but they're whatever because I know that I'm right and nothing could ever convince me otherwise, right? I've had conversations with Christians where I say, out of curiosity, like, what could change your mind or what might change your mind? And they were like, I could hear the best arguments in the world, but I would still just know that that's the devil trying to lead me away from Jesus. It's like, well, okay, that's not being intellectually honest or fair. You have to be willing to entertain the possibility that you're wrong. And you may not be, but you have to at least entertain that.
And I would agree, Zach, but by the same token, I've spoken to atheists who, when I've asked them the same question, what could make you even consider the possibility that God may exist or Christianity may be true, they've said, I genuinely can't think of anything because I think they are very wedded in a sense to their worldview. Now, so here's my challenge, I suppose, to you, Zach.
Justin says that atheists say they can't think of any reason to consider Christianity true because they're too wedded to their worldview. I dispute this. They say they can't think of a reason because they can't think of a reason. The challenge here is for the Christian to give us a reason. I can't think of a reason, but it is not because I'm too wedded to my atheism to think of one. I was disappointed by this response by Justin, so I sent him an email in which I stated, I am one of those atheists who genuinely can't think of anything that would convince me. I would describe my worldview as evidence-based, because when faced with the evidence, I will accept the proposition. My inability to be able to think of anything that could convince me is not a failure of my worldview, and it most certainly is not me being dishonest, because it's not up to me to think of what might convince me. It's up to you to present the evidence that would compel me. I suspect every atheist that I'm in regular contact with would affirm the same. Justin replied to me with a link to a short clip from another conversation where he asks Peter Atkins this same question, and he holds Peter's answer as an example of what he is talking about. In his reply to me, Justin wrote, It seems to me that he's made up his mind about God and will simply interpret any data in light of his fixed position. If you listen to Justin's Unbelievable podcast, or his guest appearance on other podcasts, you will have heard him reference this clip multiple times as an example of what he thinks is an atheist being unreasonable. I will now play the audio that Justin linked to. It is 3 minutes long. The YouTube link is in the show notes. The other voice that you will hear is Hugh Ross.
Some people might accuse you of being so committed to atheism that you'd never be willing to countenance any evidence that might lend support to a creator behind the universe. So I'm just interested, what sort of evidence could science or the physical universe present to you that would make you think, actually, that is evidence that there's a mind behind this?
I find that a very difficult question. If I were looking in the Bible for evidence, heaven forbid, I would expect to see maybe increase in entropy is equal to Q reversible divided by temperature. And that is,
if there was literally an equation in the Bible,
equation
like
in
that.
the Bible, rather than all this wishy-washy, elastic writing that it pervades.
All right. So if there was something like that they discovered in the Bible,
then I'd think it was probably a forgery. Anyway.
Well, exactly. The problem is, would it actually make you?
No.
I mean, is there anything from is there any kind of evidence in the universe that could make? I mean, if the stars lined up to spell, Peter, please believe in me, it's about time.
I put it down to madness.
You put it down to
personal madness,
right?
Yeah.
It sounds like, Peter, that there's no evidence that will persuade you away from atheism.
Well, to be honest, I think that's probably the case.
In that sense, do you even have an evidence-based view if you're actually committed to atheism a priori?
Well, I'm predicting that there will be no such evidence. That's not quite the same thing as being committed to it a priori. I can't.
But you've said there's no evidence that would persuade you otherwise.
I think it's much more likely that I would have gone mad than such evidence would have been provided.
Right. So in principle, it's impossible to ever persuade you that God exists.
I didn't quite say that, but.
Well, what would persuade you?
I can't conceive of. I suppose, even if I died and was confronted with, St. Peter saying, "Welcome to heaven," I'd probably think I was dreaming.
Would you? That leads me on to my next question.
If I were dead,
would you want it to be true? I mean, do you want God to exist in any shape or form? Would you be pleasantly surprised if you woke up on the other side of death
and found a life of eternal bliss? Of course, there's a play by Bernard Shaw, isn't there? Is it Man and Superman?
Yes, maybe.
Heaven is found to be so boring that they ask to go down to hell for a bit of fun.
I share the attitude that Peter Atkins displays in this clip. Not because I'm so wedded to atheism that I can't be convinced, but because I'm so committed to evidence that I can't imagine there being good enough evidence to convince me that the Christian God exists. That does not mean I cannot be persuaded, and it does not mean that it's impossible for me to be convinced. And Peter says the same. We are simply saying we do not know what would convince us, and we demand a high standard of evidence for any argument that might convince us. The reason is simple. It is very easy to explain away most of the claims of Christianity. And the reason for this is because they simply do not meet a sufficiently good standard of evidence. When Justin turns this around and claims that it's because atheists like Peter Atkins are unreasonably wedded to their atheism, he is not accurately representing their words. Peter Atkins didn't say he held a fixed position. He said he couldn't think of what might change his mind. This is a reasonable thing to say. When challenged, Peter actually denied that his mind could never be changed. But Justin doesn't report that when he references this clip. I don't know why Justin doesn't present Peter in a better and more accurate light, but in this case, it has sadly cost him a little bit of respect from me. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.